Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 3 for the Meadowsweet Mini Crossbody Bag. Now I did forget to do one thing in the last video, and that's mark our centers. So if you look at the main body pattern piece, you're going to see 4 center marks, and that's the center of each side of your panel. So we're just going to go ahead and transfer those marks to our 2 assembled panels, and you're going to make those center marks on the lining side, not on the exterior side. And these center marks are important for when we want to attach the assembled gusset to these panels. So now we're going to move on to the assembly of our gusset. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew up our D-ring connectors. So you're going to need both of your D-ring connector pieces. So mine are in this purple cork. And then on the wrong side, you're going to draw a line through the center. Now they are 2 inches wide, so we're drawing a line to the center, 1 inch from either long side. So my cork backing is black, so I'm using white, which I think you'll be able to see. Okay, and then we're going to need some of our double-sided tape. And because the final width is 1 inch, we're going to use 1/2 inch double-sided tape, and you just apply a strip along that center line. And remove the tape backing. And now it's a little bit hard to see the line probably on camera, but I can see it clearly through the tape. And you're folding in both halves so that this outer edge is at the center line. So you're folding these wrong sides together, and you're going to do that for both of these pieces. All right, and then, so remember that where we see the raw edges of the center, that's the wrong side of your connector, and this is the right side. So now we're going to go over to the machine, and we're just going to top stitch along both of these outer edges with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so both of the connectors are top stitched, so now we're going to fold them in half, and I have the raw edge showing here on the exterior, and we're just going to make a mark at the center of the connector with my white pencil, which is not working very well. And do the same for this one. Set those aside. Now you're going to need your gusset and your gusset pattern piece. So you'll see on the gusset pattern piece that we have these marks here at either end. Those are going to be where we're going to do our hidden connectors. So first what we're going to do is we're going to cut out those marks. So I'm just starting it with my rotary cutter, and then you'll see there's a straight line and then two little angled lines. So be very precise with those. Just use a really sharp pair of scissors to cut them out. Okay, and you don't have to cut out both. We can just use one of these marks to do the marks on the gusset. So on the right side of your gusset, you're going to transfer that mark. Now I do it with my white pencil, but it's just not working very well on my cork. It's not showing up very great, but it is there. And do the same thing on the other side. And now we're going to have to cut this out on the gusset, and be very careful. Use very sharp pair of scissors. Now I'm sure this isn't going to show up very well on camera because of my choices. So I don't know if you can see the mark. So I'm going to cut out that mark. I'm going to do it the same way. Make a little cut with my rotary cutter along the straight edge, and finish the cuts with my pair of scissors. Now it's really important that you only cut along the lines and not make the cuts too deep. So I'm going to see, there's the opening. So it's kind of like a little fabric flap now. So now you're going to take one of your connectors and you're going to slide it in that opening, and you want the wrong side facing up. So you can see that seam, and you're going to slide it into the opening up to that center mark on the connector. Now it is a very snug fit. That's intentional because we're trying to make it so there's no exposed raw edges here. So I stopped here at the mark on the connector, the center mark, and then I'm going to go over to the machine. I'm going to flip it this way. And it's very important that the connector be completely straight. So what I do is I actually mark the outer edges where I want the connector to be. Like this. And that way there, it'll make sure that your connector is nice and straight this way. Okay, so that's pretty important. You don't want to install your connector crooked like this. It's just not going to look nice. So make sure that it stays between those marks. And make sure that the top edge here of the hole that we cut has the center mark of the connector. So there's my center mark. Okay, and then we're going over to the machine and we're going to sew across. Now when you sew here, you're sewing along the gusset, not the connector, but you're sewing through the gusset and the connector. And make sure that you don't go any wider than this 1-inch section of connector. Do not go past it. And make sure that you do a little back stitch at the beginning and the end. Now you're going to need your D-rings. You're going to flip this over like this, and you're going to insert one of the D-rings like this, and then you're going to turn this and put it back through that opening. And you want to make sure that that little fabric tab is going to be inside, like pointed to the wrong side here of the gusset. Now it is a very snug fit, so it's a little bit, maybe a little bit difficult, but there we go. And you really want to get it in there. So you want to tuck it in as much as you can, but still be able to sew the next step. So you want to make sure that the foot of your machine can sew this next step without hitting the D-ring. So when you have the connector tucked inside that opening, okay, again, you want to make sure that it's tucked in evenly so this is nice and straight here. You don't want it to be crooked at all. And then we're going to go over to the machine. We're going to flip this up like this, flip this away like this, and we're going to sew here along the little fabric tab, just making sure we don't go any wider than the connector again. So our connector is 1 inch wide. You don't want to sew a line that's longer than 1 inch. And again, you're going to just sew across here and backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so that's one connector, and I also want to add a rivet in the center. So I set a rivet and I place it 3/8 of an inch down from the top edge here, you know, where that little fabric tab was. So from the base here of the connector, I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch up. And make sure that your mark is in the center. So you want it 1/2 an inch from either side here because this is 1 inch wide. My white pencil really doesn't want to work. I'm going to set a rivet here. So first I'm going to punch out the hole. Now this hole that I'm punching is going through the two layers of connector as well. Okay, so this one is set. Now we're going to do the same thing for the other end with the second connector. So you're just repeating all of the same steps that we've just done. Now when you're inserting the D-ring and folding it over, I like to make sure that the length of these is identical. So I just take a quick measurement. So it's 1/2 an inch of connector is past the opening. So I want to make sure that it's the same and that it is nice and straight on this side as well. Yeah. Okay, and then I'm going to go and sew this together. So we're just going to set that aside for now. And you're going to need your zipper panels, both the exterior and the lining pieces. You're also going to need your double pull zipper. Okay, so what we want when we're sewing the zipper panel is for these edges to always stay aligned. It's okay if they're off by a little bit, but you don't want them to be off a lot. So if you're using stretchy fabrics, you're going to want to maybe stabilize, like if you're using a stretchy vinyl, for example, you're going to want to maybe stabilize a little bit along where you're going to be sewing the zipper, or you're going to want to use a lot of clips. So first you're going to start with one lining piece and your zipper, and you're going to place your zipper along one of the longer edges and clip that in place, and then you're just going to go over to the machine and quickly baste that zipper to the lining piece just along this edge here with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're just doing a basting stitch. Okay, now you're going to take an exterior piece and place it so that the lining and the exterior, so that they're right sides together. And when you're placing them together, make sure that the corners here are at the same position at both ends before you sew together. And I don't want things to shift, so I'm going to use a lot of clips. Now I'm going to sew all these layers together along this edge. This time I'm going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so these are sewn to the zipper now, and unfortunately we cannot press. So what I like to do is split these pieces so they are wrong sides together and add clips along the outer edge, just because I want these layers to stay at the same position along the outer edges. And then I'm going to do some finger pressing. If you have a seam roller, use your seam roller. And then when I'm top stitching, I'm going to be finger pressing, but also tugging these zipper panels away from the zipper as I top stitch. Okay, so I'm going to go top stitch here along the zipper with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that one side is done, I'm going to go ahead and do the same with the other lining and exterior zipper panel and attaching them to the other side of the zipper. Now when I'm doing this, again, what's important is to make sure that these edges here are perfectly aligned. Okay, and now I'm just going to base this with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're attaching the last zipper panel piece. Again, the end, matching the ends properly. Okay, and then sewing these together this time with 1/4 inch seam allowance and back stitching at the beginning and the end. And then again, we need to top stitch. And so we're going to clip those outer edges together. And then when we top stitch, we're finger pressing and tugging the zipper panels away from the zipper. Now we're going to take our gusset and our assembled zipper panels and we're going to sew them together to make a loop. Now you're also going to need your gusset lining piece in this step. So the first thing we're going to do is place the gusset lining piece right side facing up. Then you're going to place the zipper panel at one end. And you're just going to clip that together. We're just going to do a quick basting stitch to attach the zipper panels to the gusset lining piece. Okay, so these are attached like this. And now you're going to take the gusset, flip that D-ring in, turn it over so it's wrong side facing up. I'm just going to trim these threads. And I'm going to clip these together. This. And now we're going to sew this together with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. If you're finding it really bulky at the area where your D-ring is, you might want to switch to a narrow foot or maybe your zipper foot in order to achieve that seam allowance. Okay, so these are all sewn together. Now I can flip the gusset lining and exterior pieces away from the zipper panels, and then I'm going to top stitch that seam allowance. It's going to be a little bit difficult because your connector's in the way. Again, if you need to, you can use a zipper foot or a narrow foot to get to basically sew here, top stitch here where the D-ring connector is. And then use a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the seam, but you're sewing on the gusset side here, not on the zipper panel side. Okay, so these are sewn together here. Trim some threads. Okay, so now that these are sewn to one end of the zipper panel, we're going to flip this over and repeat those same steps. So I'm going to place it this way. So you have your gusset lining piece, and you're placing the zipper panels now at the other end, the opposite end. And again, just a quick basting stitch to hold these layers together. And then the other end, so make sure that D-ring is pointing towards the center of the gusset. And clipping all these layers so they're the right sides together here. And then we're sewing all the way across with our usual 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And again, you may want to switch to a narrower foot, either a 1/4 inch or a zipper foot, to be able to achieve the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and backstitch at the beginning and the end. So now we're going to flip again so that they are right sides together. So this is going to make a loop now, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to top stitch, but not impossible. So again, we're going to top stitch this seam allowance here with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the seam on the gusset side, not the zipper panel side. Okay, so now we have this tube, and I don't want these edges to be flopping around in the next step. So what I like to do is just flip it so that it is lining side out, and then I baste all of the layers together. So the layer that's inside may seem like it's too long, but it's just because the area is shorter on the inside. So just kind of stretch it out to make sure that they fit, and then just baste along the outer edges really quickly, just with a quick basting stitch along both this side and then this side of the loop. I just want the layers to stay together for the next step. Now, before we can attach the gusset to the assembled exterior panels, we do need to find our center marks on our gusset. So what I do is I start by lining up the seams between the gusset and the zipper panels, and then just pinching that all the way like this, and then I know that's going to be my center mark in the middle of the zipper panels. Now, you could do this on all the pieces before assembling, but I don't like to do that, because if you were not exact when you were sewing up this seam, for example, then your center marks might end up being off for the next step. So I prefer to assemble the loop and then do my center marks. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the gusset. I'm going to line up those seams again, flatten this loop, and mark. So you're making these center marks on the lining side of the gusset, not on the exterior side. Okay, now when I have those marks, I can then line up these marks. So the center mark here with the center mark here. Put those together. Then do the same thing. I flatten the loop, and I know this is my center right here. And I do the same for the other side. And then do the same thing for the other edge. Okay, so now we have center marks along all the edges. Okay, so now that we have our center marks, we're going to attach the assembled panels to it. Just make sure that you open your zipper a tiny bit. You don't have to open it a lot, just a bit is fine. And you're going to take one of your panels. Now what's really important is that you attach the top edge of these panels to the zipper panel center mark. That's very important. Otherwise your pockets, if you do it this way, your pockets will be upside down. You'll never be able to use them. So I'm going to start with aligning the center mark at the top of the panel with the center mark of the zipper panel. So when you're doing attaching a gusset to panels, you always start center marks and then you pin everything else. Now I'm doing the center mark on the gusset with the center mark at the bottom of this panel, and then the center mark on the side with the center mark right here. Now my gusset is a very, very tight fit. We're going to ease it in, which I will show you at the machine when I'm sewing it. I know it feels like it might not fit, but it will. And the reason why you want a really snug gusset is so that you don't have puckers. Okay, so that's what that looks like now. And then I'm just going to clip everything else in between. Now it's going to look like it's not going to fit, but it will. We're going to be easing it in. So it's going to look like this, where it's got like some little wavy bits in the corners. That's what we want. And then just clip all this together. Now use a lot of clips. I find these clips are not great under pressure. They can sometimes break or just fly off as you're sewing. Totally normal, but kind of annoying. Okay, so lots of clips, especially in the corner. And we're going to do the same thing and clip all the other areas. Okay, so this is all clipped together. And again, I'm just making sure right side facing up, facing the gusset. So now we're going to go over to the machine and sew it. Bring along a pair of sharp scissors because we're going to be clipping into the gusset while we're sewing. And when we're sewing, you're going to be sewing with the panel on the bed of your machine, and you're going to want to have the gusset on the top facing you. So you're going to want to sew very slowly here. It's not a race, and you want to do a nice job, so take your time. I start at one of the center marks and leave your needle in the down position the entire time that you're sewing this part. Now we're getting to one of the corners, and remember we had some puckers here, and you see how this is really stretched out, so we want it to fan out to meet the edges here. So we want the edges of the gusset to meet the edges of the panel. So in order to do that, we need to do small clips in the gusset and then put some pressure on it so that it spreads out to meet the edges of the panel. Okay, so I'm forcing it to meet the edges here. Now you're going to have to stop and make a lot of adjustments to your gusset because you don't want any puckers here either. So you want everything to be laying nice and flat. Okay, so you want to make sure that it looks okay. I'm going to just close my zipper. And you just want to flip it and have a look. Make sure that you're happy with what it looks like and that you don't have any puckers. Okay, that looks good. So now we're going to do the same thing and attach the second panel. We're going to trim the unevenness and the seam allowance, but we'll do that once we've attached both panels. Okay, so again, you want to make sure that you're sewing it with the right side up. So the top center mark where the pocket of the openings is facing, that's what you want to clip to your zipper panel center mark. So we're doing exactly the same as we just did previously. Okay, so now we have both panels attached to the gusset, and we're just going to trim any unevenness in the seam allowance. Now, because we're using a very wide fold over elastic to do the binding, we don't really have to trim much of the seam allowance. It will end up covering most of it. So the fold over elastic I'm using is 1 inch wide. Comes in various lengths. I wouldn't go any smaller than 3/4 inch wide if you're not able to find 1 inch wide. But if you do want to use 3/4 inch wide, you're going to have to trim your seam allowance to 1/4 inch. Otherwise, you're going to find it way too difficult. So I just want the edges to be even so that it makes it easier for me to add the fold over elastic. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be cutting a very specific length of fold over elastic and cutting it in a way where it needs to stretch around the edges of the seams. So depending on how stretchy or not stretchy your fold over elastic is, you might need to cut a shorter or a longer length of fold over elastic. So what I would suggest doing first is kind of stretching the fold over elastic that you have around the outer edges, and make sure that it needs to stretch in order to cover the seam all the way around. So that's why I actually, in the supply list, I actually ask you to get 2 yards just in case you need to use longer length than what I'm calling for. But I will show you what mine looks like so that you understand what I mean by it needs to stretch. So I have 2 lengths that are 26 inches long. Well, no, I didn't even cut it yet. So I'm going to cut one length. Okay. So on my fold over elastic, I have a shiny side and a matte side. So the shiny side is my right side. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put the cut ends together, and then I'm going to sew them together just with your regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that I'm going to do that first to create a loop. Okay, so I now have a loop, and I'm going to, remember that the shiny side faces out, so I'm going to open that seam allowance, and there's a center, so there's a very faint center mark. That's what you want at the very edge of your seam. Okay, so I start with the fold, and you're going to need a lot of clips to hold this in place. So I'm going to start by placing that here, and then turn it around like that. And then you're going to stretch it around the edge of your bag here. And then I'm going to, so here, see how I don't know if you can see, but the center mark should be right where the edges of your fabric are. And then use that. So I don't need to, but I'm doing centers first, and then I'll do the rest. Now, what I like about using this is that you can sew it on in one step, whereas a lot of methods you need to do it in 2 steps. So just make sure you're placing it so that there's an even amount on this side and on this side. And because I cut it shorter than the actual perimeter of the bag. You have to stretch it so it makes a nice snug fit, and you don't have to worry about getting puckers in your binding as well. Now I know it is difficult to find the fold over elastic in a lot of colors and a 1 inch width, so I think 3/4 inch is more common. So it's not a big deal. Just make sure that you trim your seam allowance to a 1/4 inch before you try to sew a narrower fold over elastic. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to the machine. Make sure that you use a color of thread that matches your fold over elastic. It'll be way more forgiving that way. And then I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance when I sew this on. Now, don't worry too much if you can see the threads, the stitching from when you sewed the gusset to the panels. I used purple because I don't want a lighter color thread showing, and I used a dark purple for my gusset. Don't worry about it because once you turn the bag right side out, you're not going to see that stitching anymore. So when you're doing this, leave your needle in the down position. Okay, so that's what it looks like with the binding sewn on, and I'm going to do exactly the same steps and put the binding on this side. Okay, so the two sides have been bound. Now we're going to flip our bag right side out. And all we need to do for this part of the bag is to complete our crossbody strap. So you can use whatever strap length that you need, or whatever according to your personal preference. I always make mine 54 inches long, so that's 1.5 yards. And you do have to fold it over onto itself so you can add a little bit extra. It's a small bag, so I don't like making a really long strap. And then I'm going to heat seal the cut ends. Okay, so then you're going to need your 1.5-inch rectangle slide and your 2 swivels. First thing we're going to do is pass the webbing through one side of the slide out through the other side. So your bar is in the middle like that. Then you're going to fold the strap onto itself, just like 1 inch is fine. And then you're going to fold it onto itself again. I try not to make this too big because I don't want to waste the length of my strap. Like this. And then use some clips to hold it in place. And then I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew this. So I start at the folded end and then I do a box with an X in the middle of the box. Okay, once you've sewn the strap to the rectangle slide, you're going to need your swivels. Now making sure that the strap is not twisted. You're going to first pass it through one of the swivels, and you pass it again through the rectangle slide, first through one end and then through the other, on the other side like this. Okay, so see how it's not twisted? And then you're going to pass that end through the other swivel. And you're going to do the same thing as when you attached it to the rectangle side. You're going to first fold it onto itself about 1 inch and then fold that again flat onto the strap. Okay, make sure it's nice and straight, and then again you're going to use some clips to hold that in place. And then again a box of stitching with an X in the middle. And our strap is done. So I did skip ahead because the adjustable strap in the written pattern is at the end. But in case you didn't want to make the detachable pouch, I didn't want you to have to watch the next video and just to make a strap and not be able to complete it at the end of this video. So you just clip your strap on each of your D-rings, and then your bag is done. I hope you enjoyed making this bag. In the last video, that's for the removable pouch as well as card slots. So if you wanted to add card slots into the main part of your bag, you can do that just by following the instructions in the next video.